Thank you so much for joining us today, Steve, at Cloudscape 2021 with Nutanix. Today, we just wanted to talk to you about, how the adoption of cloud is happening with all the customers, and especially given the fact with the pandemic happening, we just wanted to understand what trends you as AWS is seeing when it comes to customers adopting cloud agility.
Definitely, yes. Thank you. That's a very, very valid question. Now, as it happens, movement to the cloud has been accelerated because of the pandemic. Of course, it was a very, very unfortunate incident, the pandemic itself. Thank God the cloud was there to help many, many customers of AWS and so on to actually move to the cloud wholesale. Now, with agility, in the sense that it actually makes it that much easier to move to the cloud in some fashion, hybrid clouds, and I'm sure we'll be talking about that in a minute. But that really is what's facilitating this massive migration.
Okay, great. I can't agree with you more. I think it's, even though the pandemic is a bad thing to have, but I think it has affected movement to the cloud in a positive way. And people, the customers are seeing the value of moving to the cloud. Of course, we as Nutanix realize that it's absolutely important, and we know that everybody is going to move towards the hyperscalers in a matter of time. Nutanix came out with clusters on AWS. What I would like to know is, what is your view on how do you see clusters? And our aim as Nutanix, obviously, is to, give the best-in-class experience to our customers. So I'd really like to know from you what your view is about clusters on AWS.
So Clusters was a tool I encountered from Nutanix a few months ago in a preceding webinar that we did, again, at the height of the unfortunate pandemic. What was interesting about Clusters is it really, let's use agility, it really facilitated the way by which customers can actually migrate wholesale, all that entire on-premise estate onto AWS. Okay, now, of course, there has to be some planning involved, but in essence, and I'm simplifying it here, you just need a connection, like a reasonably sized connection, and then click, 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 off you go, you're onto the races. Now your workloads through Nutanix are actually running on AWS, and that, of course, opens up the world of possibilities that you have of the various services on the cloud, and that's including everything from more or less infinite resources to more of the higher class services that are available, such as quantum computing, AI, and so on and so forth.
Okay. So Steve, I'm just touching a little bit about the regulations, that we have in the region and how we are covering that. It would be good to have your view on that too.
And I'm assuming that you mean within the sense of hybrid cloud.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, fantastic. Well, sure, there's no way around regulations. So governments, the laws of the land, that's how it is. That's how we have to live within those regulations. Moving on to the cloud and getting the benefit of the cloud, those resources that you have, that business continuity factor, disaster recovery in some cases, using some of those advanced services I was telling you about is there, it's available. Now, we recognize that we have to live within these laws and that framework of regulation, whatever it may be. Hybrid clouds are in a perfect position to actually take advantage of both worlds. So with some planning, as I mentioned in the previous point, you can define what workloads and what data has to remain because of regulation on premises. But through Nutanix and AWS, you're still able to maintain security and viability of those workloads and data that you move on to the cloud. As you definitely know, Nutanix and AWS both maintain security as day zero activities. That's the very first thing we come with. But then again, that opens up that I mentioned world of possibilities for you of all those different services that you have. So regulations, fact of life, we have to live with. Can you move and live within that framework through Nutanix and AWS? Definitely.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for that. So now just to wrap up, Steve, I just want to ask you, I know we did touch on the fact of how pandemic has impacted the adoption of hybrid cloud, but just getting into a little more detail in terms of the lift and shift and business continuity, and how is the integration with cloud native applications happening? How are we supporting customers to seamlessly manage all their applications and, have the seamless experience when it comes to hybrid cloud?
So the pandemic came out of left field, something completely, it was completely unexpected. And then suddenly the whole world more like changed. You no longer could actually go to a store or to a business and perform your activities. In fact, many people, most of us, couldn't actually go to the office for the longest time. So many of the activities that you saw actually had to happen more or less overnight, and that includes both, work from home, and those organizations that typically were red brick retail activities, they had to now transform into becoming e-commerce. Through the cloud in various formats and through hybrid clouds, you're able now to accommodate the regulations of the laws of the land, plus that shift onto the cloud to facilitate all this. In many, many cases, because of the situation where you had to maintain this, that's where the business continuity came in. In other cases where you actually had to have this data, DR factor in there, just in case some kind of failure would happen, then you, of course, would be moving your workloads from on-premises onto the cloud, and you're good to go with that one. The cloud is also designed with this redundancy and resiliency built into it. So, for example, let's take AWS regions. They actually have at a minimum 3 availability zones, and they're discrete, segregated data centers that are connected by dark fiber, and very, very low latency between them, and each one's built on a separate flip plane. And if anything happens to one, it will not happen to the other, and so on and so forth. So the movement to the cloud can actually facilitate this resiliency into your own workloads perfectly fine. Now, you mentioned something that's really close to my heart here, which is taking advantage of cloud native workloads. The single most important thing about cloud native workloads is them being agnostic to what they're using, and they're not tied down to any specific service or what have you. They're all API driven. That's really what we're talking about. Of course, the second you're on the cloud, that's pretty much the entire premise of the basic premises of the cloud. Everything is API driven, and through that, you're able to take advantage of all those different services that I've been banging the drum on continuously. We're expecting to see a greater drive through this thing, especially now with the recent announcements that have been coming out from AWS, and through the usage of tools that make it even easier, such as clusters. The announcement, of course, I'm talking about is the new region that we're broadcasting in the first half of 2022 for the UAE region.
Yes, in fact, I think that's great news, Steve. I mean, lots of our customers in the UAE are going to be very happy with that. Thank you so much, Steve, for joining us today. And I think to conclude, I can say that Nutanix and AWS together are here to support customers in their journey to hybrid and multi-cloud. And
that is absolutely true.
Yes, so thank you so much for your time today. And hopefully I look forward to seeing you in person sometime soon.
Hopefully after disease AD, we get to meet each other soon. But again, I'd like to re-express my thanks to Nutanix for having me here today. It was absolutely my pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.